So hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the event so far. The goal of this session will be to get you thinking about your skills and how they align with AI. So if you haven't thought about how AI is affecting your skills already, a goal will be to think about it. And if you have, then hopefully this presentation will give you some ways to think about how you can navigate the interaction of your skills and artificial intelligence. Oh yeah, and to introduce myself, I'm Sammy. So, how can AI affect skills? So, we're going to go through 3 different stages. First, looking at the cognitive science of how we can lose skills by relying on systems. Secondly, we'll look at the common patterns of how skills are lost. And then thirdly, we'll be looking at some domain areas where these are actually lost. And then putting all this together, we'll look at some areas of how we can actually mitigate this skill loss due to using AI. So it's the AI expertise paradox. So essentially, AI is pretty straightforward. So AI offers amazing convenience and productivity gains, and I think we've all seen that already. But what a lot of people don't see is the potential that you may lose innate skills that you may have built up. So one question to ask yourself is, if your favorite AI system disappeared tomorrow, would you still be able to do the task? So yeah, the paradox being that the more we rely on AI for convenience, the more our skills may decline. So one example of this in terms of relying on systems in general is the GPS effect. So many people now use GPS in the day-to-day lives. And I, myself, if you give me a map, I'm not getting anywhere. And I think, from my perspective, that doesn't bother me, because I know I have the tool and I can use it. But that's part of the question with AI is, do we want to lose that skill? And we need to be careful that we don't offload skills that we may want to be keeping. So essentially, the research found that when we follow turn-by-turn directions using GPS, essentially our brain engages less. And then when we take that away and we go back to reading a map, we don't have that same way of thinking to be able to quickly pick up and follow directions. So this is with GPS. But following on from that, there's been some recent studies on how GPTs and using ChatGPT or any of the large language models affect our brain. So essentially, it looks like a scary study, being that the more we rely on large language models, the less our brain engages. But this is to be expected, because it's essentially the same as delegating a task. If you delegate a task, you're not expecting yourself to be fully engaged in that process. So for this study, participants wrote 3 essays under 3 conditions. So the first condition was with an LLM assistant. The second one was just using traditional Google. And then the third one was fully unaided. And then during these studies, we saw that there was less brain engagement when we were using large language models. However, what this doesn't show is any long-term change in how our brains actually are. It just shows that in the moment, when we're doing the task, we're not actually thinking as much as we would do. So this isn't saying we should remove AI entirely. This is just highlighting the fact that we need to be really strategic in how that we choose to cognitively offload. So delegating a mental task to an external tool or system. We've been doing this forever. If you think about calculators, and nobody really, I don't know about you guys, but from my perspective, I don't feel like I need to know all of the functionalities of how a calculator works in my head. I'm happy to offload that task. But now for evidence of this across domains. So this is some ways that deskilling can look across different domains. This won't look the same across all domains, and deskilling won't happen in the same way. But one way it can happen is through reduced situational awareness. So when you offload to a system, your awareness of what happens becomes slightly eroded. You move further and further away from the process. So you're less mentally engaged. And when something does go wrong, it takes more time for you to be able to recover. Secondly, automation bias. So our trust in AI weakens our trust in our own judgment. So it's been shown where an AI will suggest something and we trust that over our own expertise. Thirdly, AI withdrawal performance drop. So that's essentially the idea that we've been using an AI system for 6 months. We remove the system, then we go back to doing the task before. We compare the two performances, and we can see that users are no longer performing in the same way without the system. And the fourth one kind of captures all of that in terms of the gradual deterioration from the skills that are no longer practiced. So if we look across domains, in medicine, there's a multi-center endoscopy study. So it observed the AI withdrawal effect. So essentially, this was the exact use case. So for 6 months of use, the clinicians had grown dependent on the tool, and when they removed it, it showed that they were less confident in their performance without the system. With clinical trials, this highlights the biased model recommendations. So accuracy fell when they relied on a system rather than their own judgment. And aviation and automated driving. So this here is less about AI, but it sort of highlights the fact that automation has always been doing this. It's highlighted, I think, as early as in 2010. Pilots using autopilot had their skills eroding, so it became such that the regulatory body said, you need to practice doing this manually every 3 to 6 months. So across all of those domains, the key patterns that we see is cognitive skills. This may seem like common sense, but it's the use it or lose it principle with these skills. And of course, the highest risk occurs where the errors have significant consequences. And it's interesting to see that the speed of the loss of skill is accelerated when you're forced to think in a high pressure situation, and when you have time pressures. So, to follow on from this is another sort of tangential argument around the use of AI. And I appreciate at the moment I'm coming up with all of the ways AI can reduce skills, but going forward I'll be offering the solutions on how we can mitigate against this. And I think being able to really understand where AI can reduce the skills allows us to design systems that mitigate against this, as well as when we're using the systems ourselves, be able to focus on using it in a way that helps preserve our skills. So essentially this is the talent pipeline problem. So you might have seen lots of large companies now are reducing entry-level roles. So let's say we've built an AI system with one of our experts in the company. They've got 20 years of experience. We've built all of that logic into the system. They leave, and now we have new entrants using this tool. If something goes wrong with the tool, do they know how it works? Because the AI system works so well, can they actually validate the outputs? So one way to mitigate this is for organizations to deliberately design paths to maintaining that hands-on experience for those skills that they deem to be most critical. So yeah, building sort of like an apprentice system where AI augments the learning rather than fully replacing the user. And then finally, business continuity being skill continuity. So I don't think this is something that many businesses will see now, but as we become more and more reliant and as AI becomes increasingly sophisticated, we're going to be delegating more and more of our innate expertise to AI. And we really need to think about how we navigate that in terms of, from a strategic perspective, we are offloading a lot of our core value to these AI systems. So one response to that is to architect the systems so that they can both aid the experts, but also capture additional tacit knowledge that isn't stored anywhere else. So I've gone through all of the many issues potentially, but now how do we design for skill retention? So these systems don't have to erode human expertise. If we design them carefully, they can preserve and strengthen it. And in addition to this, whether you're designing systems yourself or using them, the same sort of thought processes come in terms of thinking, is this a skill that I want to, am I happy losing this skill? You need to think about that when you're using these systems. So these are some design patterns. I won't go into all of these in massive detail, but the general Copilot one I think everyone's pretty aware of. The model where we build a system that's enhancing rather than fully taking the human out of the process. The second point here is to highlight the fact that it's great to have a system that can do everything. Agentic AI is really cool, but the more and more we make the systems confusing and really fancy, the less an individual can actually understand what's going on in the background. So shadow mode, this is more seen in healthcare, where you run a system in parallel with a human expert, and then you compare the two results as if there wasn't, we weren't even using the system. And the next three, I'll go into a bit more detail in the next slides. So skills-aware UX. So essentially, the concept here is to embed education into the AI system. So if you've used, I think it's Notebook LLM, there's tons of tools now that are really good at teaching you. There's a new one by Google, I think, where it takes a textbook and turns it into an interactive learning experience. But these are all separate workflows. They sit outside of an employee's daily work. The concept here is to how can we embed the skills learning into the daily workflows so that we're not just automating the work, we're also integrating back that learning that may be lost. So 4 ideas around this is interactive feedback. So when a user accepts a response from the AI, asking them to explain why they've accepted it, to enforce them to really engage in the response. Comparative learning. So the example here would be to provide them with 2 different outputs. One, a low quality that a junior person would do, and then one with a high quality. And then having those 2 comparisons, they can see potentially see why the experts was the route to go. And then finally, knowledge capture. So being able to capture knowledge within the systems throughout. So you can see the example up there, adding a little bit more forced learning into the system forces a bit more engagement. So explainable AI is a concept in AI generally, which is essentially being able to explain why the system does what it does. So this is really important in terms of keeping our skills, because let's say you're a data scientist, you've worked with a domain expert to build a system, you've turned all of their logic into code in the back end, and you've lifted that from them. And if they don't understand how that process works now, when you train new experts or new people join these new cohorts, they're not able to see in the back end what is actually happening. So some ways of integrating this into the system is to have the causal reasoning chains, so to actually see the logical flow that the AI has gone through. Again, you see this in systems already, so human in the loop validation. So before it can go to the next step, you require approval. So concept-based explanations. So this is again the idea that although it's nice to send an AI off to go and do a task entirely, it's also good to be able to have these metrics in the background to actually see what's happening. So thirdly, this can be seen both from an individual's perspective and an organization. So if you're thinking to yourself when you're using these systems, say you're a coder, is there a minimum amount of coding expertise you want to make sure that you're not offloading to an AI system? So setting a competency floor. So what skills do you want to retain when you're offloading to AI systems? As well as they become more critical, implementing quarterly, no AI assessments. So for skills that we've determined that we don't want our employees to lose, or I've decided I don't want to lose, forcefully programming in those times where you're not using AI, you're forcing yourself to remember the process that it was done previously. So this is an example from the US government of actually how they've implemented a design process to be able to capture knowledge from their experts. So essentially, it's quite a simple approach, but the AI system generates an output. That output then has errors. The subject expert then corrects these documents and says why they've corrected it. They then take this output and put it into a knowledge map, and this now becomes, I guess, a tacit knowledge graph of things that, if you ask an engineer or an expert how to explain something, it's quite difficult to, but they can explain when something's wrong. So being able to capture this built a strong tacit knowledge graph that allows self-improvement. And there's a paper there that I can share with you if you're more interested in that. But essentially, it's a system that allows the experts to be able to articulate how they're validating these outputs. So I probably should have started with this one, but a previous way of thinking was quite binary. So we should delegate this to AI, we shouldn't. So a lot of people were thinking in the way that some skills we shouldn't ever delegate, but I think the thinking needs to shift a little bit more to, yes, we need to keep these skills, but it's more delegate and practice so that we can both get the benefit of the productivity, but also ensure that we're not losing that expertise to be able to validate these increasingly complex systems. So yeah, as AI capabilities expand, we delegate increasingly complex tasks. So the decision isn't whether to delegate, but how to maintain those skills that define our competitive advantage. So that is pretty much everything. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I think I ran through that quite quickly. So if you have any examples of how you're currently navigating the use of AI and your retention of skills, that'd be really interesting. I think there was a question over there.
I was wondering about the skills. Like, how do you determine about what skills should be retained and what skills should be delegated? Yeah,
so I think that it comes down to both at an organizational level and at a individual level. I think part of it is risk, so how risky is that task? So in medical care, it's quite simple that you want to ensure that your doctors actually still understand how to do the manual screening for particular tumors, etc. But also it comes down to, say, for what's your company's competitive advantage? And at an individual level, what's your competitive advantage? Like what is the skill that you think that you are always going to do better than AI, or something that you want to be able to know in enough detail so that you can ask AI to do it and actually know that AI has done it well. So it's not an easy answer to that one. It's really case-by-case basis. Yeah.
Hi. Where does accountability fall with AI and the decisions it makes compared to a human?
Well, the accountability is always with the human. Whoever's using the system, they remain accountable. So I guess this is more around assuming the system works perfectly. What do we do about our skills? But yeah, the accountability always has to stand with the person using the tool. That's how. Yeah, there's no way around that, essentially. I think there was another.
Yeah, so with kind of repetitive AI use, what happens is that you kind of get a challenge and you have to respond to it.
Yeah.
But it almost becomes like muscle memory, so you just say yes.
Yeah.
And then kind of it becomes a bit of an arms race because the AI system kind of goes, well, you need to do this, and then you ignore it and just use your muscle memory. So any kind of insight into that?
Oh, so this is the example where AI suggested something and you just get used to saying, yes, I trust this. Yes, I trust this. Yeah. I think part of it, in terms of, let's say you're using just Copilot or, ChatGPT to actually ask questions yourself, don't ever accept something that it first gives you. Always explain, for your own perspective, try and learn why it's done what it's done. But in terms of actually designing that into the system, being able to capture the reasoning of why the user actually accepted it. So even just a simple text box that says why did you accept this output? You then have that causal chain in terms of in your system to be we agreed, we accepted this, but with this reasoning. The same way you would validate any sort of co-worker's work when you sign off on it. That would be one suggestion.
So you're kind of shifting the responsibility back onto the user. Is that?
Yeah. And then there's so many different design patterns that can be used. I think once you see where the skill erosion can come from, depending on how you see fit, there's so many different ways you can force people to really engage again where they haven't been before. Sorry, yeah.
I guess with all the kind of movement towards increasingly agentic architectures, you've now got the human increasingly being removed from the loop, and you've got agents checking each other's work, and it kind of feels like that problem will get exacerbated. How do you think organizations can mitigate against that with that direction of travel?
Yeah, it's really tricky. I think it's to be able to define your core competencies is really important, to know what skills you are not allowing to ever be fully offloaded to AI. Because this is worst case scenarios, right? In reality, if you use an AI system, you're not going to forget everything you ever knew. Maybe you will, but you're likely to slowly erode it. So I think it should be built into business continuity. It becomes a business risk at some point. Not at this stage, I don't think, for most businesses, but you've seen large companies hire back large numbers of staff after they've seemingly thought that their AI system was perfect. So yeah, I don't have an answer for it, but I do think it's something that should be clearly built into into the organizational strategy. Yeah.
Hello. What are your thoughts about selling this approach to organizations who are under immense pressure to cut costs as rapidly as possible?
Yeah, I think so the approach here isn't to take away the productivity benefits. It's just to say that if we are going to build a system that has these productivity benefits, AI is a double-edged sword there. Like, it can both improve productivity, but it's also amazing at teaching. So why don't we build both of this into the same system and take a percentage of that productivity gain and use that to continually upskill our employees? So I think it's tricky because businesses see the benefits of productivity straight away, but I do think there's the learning culture that can be embedded in addition to that. Awesome. Yeah, I think that's everything then. Thank you everyone for your time.
Please put your hands together.